Hello everyone and welcome back to the finals of the Grand Chess Tour. Levon, Aronian and Magnus Carlsen are battling it out for third place, and before we check it out, do be a part of the subscribers video 2020. I will be repeating that for quite a few videos now. If you don't know what it is, there will be a link in the description below explaining everything, so do check it out and be a part of it. You will enjoy it. And also we do have a nice photo, again courtesy of Leonard Otis, official photographer of the Grand Chess Tour. Here is a photo of the two gentlemen. Both are in good spirits, as you can see, and there are the two gentlemen behind them who made the first moves on the board, d4 and the knight to f6. So unlike children, I'm sure they knew which moves Magnus and Levon will play, as they left those moves on the board. And if you know who the two gentlemen are that made the moves, comment in the comment section below so we can all learn something. That being said, let's check out the game. So Magnus with the white pieces opens with d4, as you've seen in the photo. Knight to f6 by Levon. We have knight to f3, d5 and bishop to f4. Magnus goes for his London system. We have c5 by Levon, and now comes e3. Which is, convenient as it is the London chess classic. We have knight to c6, knight bd2, and now c captures on d4. We have e captures on d4, and queen to b6 now, putting pressure on the d4 pawn, but also the b2 pawn. So knight to b3, taking care of both threats, and now bishop to g4. And here Magnus just goes a4. Since, it kind of looks like you can grab this guy and then win a pawn here, but, Magnus wouldn't play it if this was possible, because after captures and queen captures, knight captures on d4, after captures and captures, you get in a lot of trouble after bishop to b5. Now you lose castling privileges, or even worse, if you block with the knight, then rook d1 is just deadly. You move the queen, then you lose this guy, and the black falls apart. You can't even trade queens with check, because after captures, you're still gonna lose the knight on d7. So after a4, Levon just continues with a6, which is a new move in the game. There is one game where e6 was played, but a6 is a new move, making room for the queen on a7, and it is as of move 8 that we have a completely new game. So Carlsen pushes the queen all the way back with queen a7 and now c3. A very solid setup for white. Gets another defender to the d4 pawn with e6. Levon prepares to develop the dark square bishop and castle. Bishop to e2, Magnus also prepares the castle, and now knight to h5, going after the dark square bishop with bishop to e3. And now, since the queen is pretty much useless, on a7 first, queen to b8. Gaining control of the f4 square, so maybe you can bring the knight over to f4 would be nice, as it will come with an attack on the bishop and the g2 pawn. But Magnus takes care of it with h3. So now we have bishop captures on f3, bishop captures. Now knight f4 isn't really all that impressive, since the bishop is no longer on e2, white can just castle. So Levon just brings it back to f6. With bishop back to e2 now. Now Magnus wants to bring the bishop over to d3 to be used for attacking purposes, with bishop to d6 now and bishop to d3. We have castles, and Magnus castles, not with the queen obviously. Sorry, there's a mic here so I can't see the queen and the king. King to g1, castling, so the king goes to g1, and the dh3 is already played, so you don't have to worry about bishop captures pawn. We have queen to c7 now, again connecting rooks. You want to get the rook into the game. Rook to e1, and now comes king to h8. So any captures on h7 will not come with check in the future, and if you move the knight, you really know the queen wants to come over to h5. So we have queen to f3, rook 8 to e8 now, preparing e5, but it will be difficult to execute e5 since the queen is already attacking the d5 pawn. Once you push e5, you just lose the d5 pawn. With bishop to g5 by Magnus, threatening just to capture the knight here. So knight to g8. That's why king to h8 was a very nice move, making room for the knight. We have rook to e2. Now preparing to either bring the other rook over to e1, but it will also serve as a defender of the second rank. And now, again, you still can't push e5 because d5 is hanging, so knight to e7. Now you could push e5 since the knight guards the d5 square, but Magnus goes queen to h5. Now forces Levon to either weaken the king side or bring the knight back to g6, which Levon does. Now there is no mate on h7, and bishop back to c2. adding a defender to the knight if it ever gets under attack. For example, if black pushes b6, captures this, maybe brings the rook over to b8, you could have a lot of pressure on the b file. So king back to g8. If bishop captures knight, you want to be able to capture with the knight here. But what you really want is to get the rooks out of there and get the knight over to f8, so the knight can defend the h7 pawn from f8. With bishop back to d2 by Magnus, and now knight to b4, hoping to either trade or pick up the bishop. Bishop back to b1, and now Levin just retreats. Knight back to c6. We have bishop back to d3 now by Magnus, and now, of course, this will not be possible since you will not be winning anything with the queen, and rook to b8. Now Levin prepares to break through on the king side. So Levin is not content with just repeating moves. He also wants to play something. Bishop to e3 by Magnus, and now here Magnus is planning to bring the knight over to c5. We have rook f to e8, now clearing the f8 square for the knight, so you can defend the h7 pawn from there. We have g3, and now completely taking away the f4 square from black's pieces, and now knight to f8. We have bishop back to c2 now. Again, asking Levin, what do you want to play here? Here, knight to b4, if you play it, it doesn't really work because the rook now guards the bishop here. So we have b6, opening up the b file, and now comes a captures on b6. We have rook captures on b6, and now bishop to c1. Sorry, not b1, bishop to c1. Now, you want to move the knight, but you need to defend the b2 pawn from the rook. Rook e to b8, Levin doubles up on the b file, and now knight to c5 as planned, as the b2 pawn is now nicely protected. So here, Magnus is threatening to pick up the a7 pawn, but Levin sacrifices it. He says this is the perfect opportunity to push e5, so this is exactly what he does. Now captures is met with just captures knight, but Magnus picks up the a6 pawn. Levin plays queen to a7. Now the knight is kind of trapped. You can't really move it because you lose the rook on a1. But Magnus plays d captures on e5, now attacks the bishop here. And here, if you just move the bishop, then bishop d3, and you defend your knight, so it's not a problem. So here, first Levin pushes the queen back, and now he wants to move the knight. Knight captures on e5, but he wants to do it with an attack on the queen. Queen to g4, and now knight captures on e5 comes with an attack on the queen. We have queen to a4, now Magnus brings a defender to the knight, and rook to c8. So what do you do here? We have bishop to e3, now putting pressure on the rook and the queen, and Levin blocks it with d4. d4 is an excellent defensive resource because either you capture with this guy, and then you get knight f3, check king h1, and queen b7, threatening a lot of nasty discoveries here, or you get bishop captures on d4, which was played in the game, but now the bishop is on a, not a very convenient square because now knight f3 picks it up, so you get rid of this annoying threat. King g2, knight captures d4, and now queen captures on d4. Again, eliminating the threat of rook captures here, because if rook captures on a6, now you just pick up the queen, and after all is said and done, white is up the exchange, but also up 2 pawns, so Magnus would be completely winning here. So after queen d4, we have knight to e6 now, attacking Carlsen's queen, and here Carlsen doesn't just move the queen and allow Levin to create some sort of an attacking setup with getting bishop over to c5. He just eliminates the knight. Rook captures, f captures, and bishop to e4. You could also start with rook to a2, but Magnus wants to get the rook over to a2 now, which will allow the knight to move. Knight b4 will come with an attack on the queen, but also once you push the b pawn, you want the rook to defend the f2 pawn, because the f2 pawn is a real weakness in Carlsen's position, and if Levin is able to consolidate with rook to f8, maybe getting the bishop to c5, it will be a lot of pressure. So this is how Carlsen does it. First, 11 goes rook to f8. You do want your rook there, putting pressure on the f2 pawn. But now rook to a2. Now knight to b4 is definitely a possibility. And here 11 has two good options, but he's already starting to get very low on time. One of them is rook b7, just offer a trade of queens here. And here you would get after... well, rook to b7 was played, but rook to f7 was also a possibility. Then you get knight to b4, opening up an attack here, but then rook captures on b4. Rook captures on a7, rook captures on d4. Rook to a8 check, and now not king to g7, but bishop to f8 blocking, and now c captures on d4. You get this position where, okay, it's an endgame of bishops of opposite color, but Carlsen is still up 2 pawns. So this is one way to go about it. Levin chooses the other way. He goes rook to b7, offers a queen trade this way. And okay, Carlsen trades. We have rook, queen captures, rook captures, and now b4. And this is what he wanted to achieve. Now everything is nicely protected, and you also take away the c5 square from the bishop. So rook to b8. Here 11 wants to get rook to b6 in and start attacking the knight, and also it seems like you cannot start pushing your c pawn, but you actually can. That's why rook to c8 was a better idea, preventing c4, but he went rook to b8, and now Carlsen just starts pushing the pawn. And now you cannot capture here, because of course if you capture, just knight captures, so it's not a problem. Rook captures, you can pick it up with the knight, and you end up this in this endgame, knight and bishop against the rook. Which of course is winning for white. So after c4, 11 goes rook to b6, puts, well, pressures the knight, but now b5, and the knight is defended. We have king to f7, and now rook to c2, starting to push c5, and now 11 can't just wait and see what happens. Even though he's up the exchange, the two connected pass pawns are too strong. So he gives up one of the rooks. Rook b captures on a6, captures, and now we're in the bishops of opposite color endgame. There is one rook pair on the board as well, but Magnus has a pass pawn, and of course he pushes it. c5. We have bishop to e5, and now c6. So rook to a7. Now Magnus has to figure out how to get the pawn past the c7 square. It's a dark square, so your light square bishop is useless in helping out with that. So as long as the rook and bishop cover the c7 dark square, you are not getting this pawn, over that square. So you have to introduce a second weakness, something we often mention, the principle of two weaknesses. We have h4. Now h5 will create more weaknesses on the king side. We have king to f6, and now rook to d2. We have bishop to c3, rook to d3 attacking the bishop, bishop to b4, and now king to h3. We have bishop back to e7, and now f3. So slowly but surely improving the position. We have e5 by 11, and now rook back to c3. We have bishop to d6, you can't allow the pawn to reach c7, and now rook back to c1. We have h6 by 11, but now rook to d1, attacking the bishop, bishop back to e7. You cannot defend with the king because you also have to keep an eye on the g6 pawn, so king to g4 now. We have king to f7, and now rook back to b1. We have bishop to d6. So it's not a problem if you trade rooks, because the bishop will still be guarding the queening square even after the pawn is transferred over to the b file. So you are not queening that pawn ever. So we have h5, starting to create a second weakness. G captures on h5, king captures, and now we get this position where 11 will have a lot of problems defending both threats, keeping an eye on c7 and also keeping an eye on the h6 pawn. King g7 defending, but now rook to d1, attacking the bishop. Bishop back to b4. Now rook to d5. There's a third weakness, which is the e5 pawn. So rook to e7, and now bishop to f5. And it was in this position on move 66 that 11 Aronian resigned the game, as it is, it's a certain death, but he will just slowly suffer until it's all over, because this is a technical win, and for Magnus Carlsen that will not be a problem. Just to show you an idea, so like we said, black has to keep an eye constantly on the e5 pawn. He can't let white grab it. He has to keep an eye on the h6 pawn, and he also needs to keep an eye on the c7 square. So those are the three weaknesses in the position, and it will be impossible to keep an eye on both of them. So you need to play something. Okay, you will play rook c7. You hope to trade this pawn for this pawn, but white can always go bishop to e4. Now if you capture it, you just create a discovery and pick up the rook. So the c6 pawn is not free for grabs. So rook back to e7. Now you're going to go rook to d8. Now you want to get bishop here and threaten rook to g8 check. So bishop back to c5, bishop d5, but now king h7. You're going to go rook to f8, and now as you're threatening rook to f6 to pick up the h6 pawn, bishop to e3. Now you have to defend that guy as well. rook to f6. Now again, black has to play a useful move. Let's say bishop g5, you're gonna go bishop to e4 check, king g7, bishop rook to g6 check, king to f8, and then now bishop back to d5. Now you're just threatening rook g8 mate. So after rook to c7, you will go f4 now. It's very easy to find useful moves. Captures. Now you cannot capture because rook f6 will pick up the bishop, so you have to move it. And now after f5, now this pawn is marching forward. Everything is nicely protected. Next move, you're going to lose this pawn, so there is really no way to play this. Even if you defend it, you're gonna get f6. Now all of these squares are nicely protected. Rook to g8 will be mate. So here black will have no other options. You will have to give up the bishop, and now you're just down a piece, and you're completely lost. So of course Levon knows this, and he's incredibly low on time. Maybe he even lost on time. I'm not sure, but well, regardless of what happened, it's a completely winning position for white. So that's why, of course, either Levon resigned or he let the time run out. But yeah, great win for Magnus, and an important one. He still prolongs his undefeated streak, which is now, I believe, 106 games undefeated streak in classical time format, and his win in the classical time format against Levon gets him 6 points. So if Levon does not retaliate in the classical time format, it will be somewhat difficult to get back. Like we said, it's 6 points for a win in the classical, 4 points for a win in rapid, and 2 points for a win in the blitz section. But you know, the match is still young, anything can happen. So that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, be a part of the subscribers video 2020. Find all the information in the description below. The first 2-3 links are the ones that are important, so do check it out. The explanation is in the video with the puzzle, so if you haven't seen the puzzle, do check that out as well. I would like to thank Adam Decker, Matt Zimmerman, Jose Veraldo Ali Jr., Randy Raveling, and Paul Goggin for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Grandchester Finals, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and well, after all that is covered, we are continuing with our next big saga. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.